Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for being either in Guildford or online following this presentation. And of course, thank you to the program committee for having accepted this paper. Today, I would like to revisit a set of recordings that many of us know very well. Pau Casals' interpretations of the Saraband from Bach cello suites. These performances are often treated as canonical, iconic, and by some as even definitive. But I want to approach them from a slightly different angle, not as fixed statements of style or doctrine, but as expressive artifacts shaped by the body, by the mechanics of cello playing, by moment-to-moment adjustments, and by the contingencies of recording technology and the aging body. Casals didn't just interpret these works, he lived with them. He discovered them as a teenager in a second-hand music shop in Barcelona. He annotated his first copy with blue pencil and kept it with him for the rest of his life. Before the suites became standard cello repertoire, Casals had already begun performing and recording them, often against the advice of peers who dismissed them as studies or curiosities. And over the course of 4 decades, at least, he recorded different versions of the sarabandes, from 1915 to 1954 at least. The peak of this engagement was naturally his recording of the entire cycle of 6 suites in the 1930s for his master's voice in 12-inch shellac discs. But what happens when we listen to these recordings not just as historical documents, but as traces of bodily performance? What if we try to reconstruct not only what Casals played, but how and perhaps why? To do this, I draw on digitized recordings, annotated student editions or manuscript scores, and a video from the 1954 Prads Festival. After extracting numerical data with the help of Sonic Visualizer, I also apply computational tools such as hierarchical clustering and principal component analysis to analyze expressive timing and dynamic variations. But my goal is not statistical, it is musical. I aim to access the embodied decision making that animates these performances, to listen with and through the performer's body. This approach, which can be called embodied listening or embodied analysis, assumes that musical meaning is not only abstract or analytical, but physical. It emerges from pressure, weight, friction, or resistance, and it leaves audible traces. Casals sarabandes, when listened to at sufficient granularity, tell us not only about phrasing and rhythm, but also about movement, effort, and constraint. They are performances in the fullest sense, acts of interpretation shaped by hands and strings in this case, microphones and memory. Let's begin with the genre itself. The saraband is usually described as a slow dance in triple meter, solemn, expressive, inward. Bach wrote one for each of his cello suites. They share the same meter and tempo, similar formal structures, and a comparable emotional tone. But Casals doesn't treat them as a uniform group. In fact, one of the most striking findings from this project is just how differently he approaches each one. His sarabands are not variations on a theme, they are distinct expressive environments. In some, Casals emphasizes harmonic pacing. In others, he privileges physical gesture or rhythmic flexibility. In some, he draws attention to polyphony. In others, he pares everything back to bare melodic line. And in each, he responds not only to the music, but to the instrument, the home, the recording process, even his own physical state. In what follows, I will walk through five examples from different sarabandes, some familiar, some perhaps less so, and then offer a few broader reflections. Casals recorded Sarabande number 1 in G major twice, in the studio in 1938 and live at the Prats Festival in 1954. On the surface, the two performances are quite similar, more or less the same tempo, same basic phrasing, same formal architecture. But beneath the surface, their differences reveal a great deal about Casals' approach. In the 1938 version, we hear extraordinary regularity. Casals shapes each 8-bar section into two 4-bar phrases. He emphasizes the ends of each phrase with what is called group final lengthening, a slight stretching of time usually coupled with a softening of dynamic. He then pushes into the next unit with renewed energy. The architecture is audible and is the same across both repeats of each section. On the slides, you will be seeing my attempt at transcribing what Casals does in all these recordings. Let's listen to the beginning. But in 1954, this logic softens. Casals plays with more freedom, more variation, and the dynamic and timing profiles are less symmetrical. In bar 1, for example, we hear a striking expressive peak, one that didn't exist in 1938. It coincides with a dissonant chord and a second beat accent, but also with a visible bow strain. In the following video from the Prat Festival, Casals appears to miscalculate the up bow required to reach the upper string in time. The resulting tone is tense, almost brittle. I'm gonna jump directly into the sarabande. This is not an error, it's a consequence, and it tells us something vital. Interpretation is not just conceptual, it is ergonomic. How Casals distributes the bow, which notes fall under up or down bow, how much pressure is needed to sustain tone across a string crossing, all of this shapes the musical phrase. And it is not just in live performance. In the studio version, Casals omits a note from the opening chord, he uses more open strings, and opts for a slightly faster tempo, all decisions that ease the bowing. These are not interpretive flourishes. They are bodily solutions to musical problems. The D minor sarabande number 2 offers a different perspective. Here, Casals constructs phrases using what is called arc-shaped gestures. He increases energy, crests a phrase, and then gradually recedes. These arches are marked by combined timing and dynamic shaping, often leading into cadences. For example, at the end of the A section, he slows and softens slightly before resolving into the new key. The same pattern recurs in bar 23, where a perfect authentic cadence in D minor is gently prepared by a diminuendo and a stretch. Casals also manipulates dynamic in very subtle ways. In bars 17 and 18, which form a descending sequence, he plays the first bar forte and the second mezzo forte. It's a very simple move, but it highlights not only the melodic direction, but also the harmonic shift from dominant to diminished chord. He's using volume not to mark melody, or not just to mark melody, but to trace harmonic tension. And then there are the portamenti. Casals is ambivalent about the slides. He reportedly told the students to use them sparingly and only for semitone shifts. But in his recordings, he slides when it suits the expressive shape, even on larger intervals. For example, in bar 26, he uses a portamento to spotlight a sharpened leading tone. The gesture calls attention to the note's tension, not just the interval. Here too, technique and expression overlap. Sometimes Casals chooses fingerings that increase tension, using a weak finger across strings, for instance, to bring out effort. Sometimes he slides early or late to highlight a shift in voice leading. These decisions are not just about expression, they are expressions themselves. Sarabande number 3 in C major, 2, was recorded twice, once in 1916 and again in 1936. Despite the 20-year gap, the performances share certain features: a focus on harmonic rhythm, a preference for local diminuendi, and a tendency to accelerate through four semiquaver groups. But even here, there is contrast. In bars with chords, Casals often slows slightly to articulate each note. In bars without chords, he rushes the rhythm slightly, creating forward momentum. This contrast structures entire phrases. What it is striking is how these expressive features interact with technical choices. In bars where Casals accelerates, he usually avoids awkward string crossings. In places where the tempo eases, the technical demands are higher, suggesting that his expressive phrasing is partly driven by the hand or the arm. Student scores again provide a point of contrast. In some cases, Casals plays the phrases legato, where Grothendieck and von Tobel, two of his students, annotate bow changes. Elsewhere, he connects notes across beats that the students break up in their slurs. These differences may reflect evolving ideas, or they may reflect adaptation to the moment or to the student. Either way, they show that interpretation is not fixed. The sarabande from suite number 5 in C minor is stark and restrained. Casals avoids portamento almost entirely, and vibrato is minimal. The expressive material comes from rhythm. One of his key devices is a slight inégalité between quavers. The first is lengthened, the second shortened. But this pattern is flexible. When the second note is higher in pitch, Casals reverses the pattern, lengthening it instead. The result is a rhythm that breathes, a rhythm or a timing that listens to melody. He also adjusts his approach in response to instrument behavior. The note F natural in the third octave appears often. And on Casals' cello, probably an old Italian cello, it activates a wolf tone, a kind of acoustical instability. In those moments, he shortens or lightens the note. Sometimes he even shifts the fingering to avoid it. This is particularly evident in bar 3, where, as the spectrogram on the screen shows, the fundamental frequency is clearly broken. In the second repeat, shown on the right, and in later instances, he seems to have found a physical solution, generally involving playing with heavier pressure, slower bow, and even in a faster tempo. These are sonic compromises that become expressive features. In bars 19 and 20, for example, we hear a leap from B to the low C. Despite the leap, Casals connect the phrase smoothly. Why? Because the C, the low C, is not part of a new idea. For him, it is the continuation of the previous one. He is shaping phrasing not by contour, but by harmonic function. He wants to lead into the resolution. And again, interpretation and analysis converge. The final saraband in D major from Suite number 6 shows yet another side of Casals' thinking. Here he plays with timing at the semiquaver level, elongating notes that coincide with registral peaks or structural tones. In bars 21 to 24, he emphasizes a melodic line that weaves through double stops and arpeggios. He does this not by playing louder, but by stretching time slightly at key points. The effect is of a voice rising through texture. Portamento returns here, often linked with modal mixture. In bars 25 and 27, Casals uses sliding gestures to highlight a shift from major to minor, a kind of expressive coloring that supports the tonal narrative. Here as well, he also manipulates bow pressure in response to both tones. In bar 31, a lengthened F sharp becomes a point of tension, not just musically, but physically. The tone is slightly forced, but it's a meaningful force. It tells us something is being resisted. Performance here is not neutral, it is an act of overcoming. Let me briefly summarize a few broader patterns. Casals often decouples timing and dynamics. He rarely emphasizes a note, both cogically and dynamically at the same time. Instead, he uses timing to shape syntax and dynamics to articulate tension. This separation creates layered expressivity. He aligns expression with harmonic function. Crescendi and decrescendi often follow harmonic direction, not metric stress. Tension builds toward dissonance and recedes after resolution. He adapts constantly. Fingerings, bowings, phrasing, they all shift depending on context. Even repeated sections often differ in very subtle ways. Nothing is fixed. Pedagogy and practice diverge. Casals' recordings often contradict the markings in the students' editions or in their scores. This isn't inconsistency, it is the difference between principle and practice, between what is taught and what is felt. So, in the end, what do the sarabandes tell us? They teach us that performance is not the delivery of meaning, it is the creation of it. That interpretation is not just conceptual, it is material, physical, that the body doesn't just carry music, it shapes it. Casals sarabandes are not clean, control artifacts. They are expressive, contingent events. They reflect decisions made in time, decisions shaped by habit, training, context, and constraint. They are what happens when music passes through a human body. Listening to them closely, computationally, physically, empathetically, invites us to rethink not only Casals, but performance itself, not as execution, but as enactment, not as a mirror of the score, but as a text in its own right. Thank you very much for your attention. If you want to get in touch, you can reach out to me at this email address.